My colleagues have spoken to people from the group, which is why we're not talking to them this afternoon. Women for Change says all women, all members of the LGBTQI plus community must not work. They must refrain from all paid and unpaid work and not spend any money on Friday the 21st to demonstrate the economical and social impact of the absence from paid and unpaid work of these two communities. Also calling on people to wear black, take part in a 15-minute standstill at midday to honour the 15 women murdered every day. That's out of a total of somewhere around 70 people murdered every day in South Africa. And Siya Kolisi did what they did and made his social media profile purple. I know one organisation, the Book Lounge, for example, they have decided not to open on Friday as a response to this call. And will it change anything for persecuted women and persecuted members of the LGBTQI plus community? I don't think so. Will it harm them? Probably not. So is it a good thing? Is it a neutral thing? How does one think about it? Lisa Vetten is a researcher specialising in gender violence and a research associate at the Wits Southern Centre for Inequality Studies. Lisa, hello.
Hello, John, and good afternoon to our listeners.
When I pressed on the line on the screen that has your name, it went purple. I don't know whether that was deliberate. I don't want to criticize this because then I might come across as being insensitive to the terrible plight of women who are treated appallingly by many men. And should we ask, is it going to make a difference? Are those legitimate questions to ask?
Yes, they are, because I think these kinds of calls emerge out of a very real sense of frustration and anger, and sometimes even a sense of helplessness, that so little seems to change despite everything that's being done. So I think, these sorts of actions are perfectly legitimate, and they may make a difference in the sense of, people feeling a little less powerless. However, a single act of protest is not sufficient to change what are deep-rooted structural and systemic problems, to excuse academic language. You need to tie action to a set of ongoing strategies. So while the Women for Change has also called for the declaration of a national state of disaster, as its kind of follow-up long-term action, I think where we need to have a debate is that the most strategic intervention in trying to ensure that we shift the dial in a meaningful way on economic marginalization and violence?
If this event on Friday and the publicity around it in the build-up to and the analysis afterwards makes anybody in government who is charged with making the situation less awful than it is a little more urgent, a little more inclined to offer support to the NPOs, civil society groups who are involved in this, fund women's shelters better, then great. I don't think it is, because for goodness sake, Lisa, how long have you and I been having these conversations? Usually around the 16 days campaign and so on. And so we kind of know what to do. We're just not doing it.
Well, exactly. So that's why I think, the kind of analysis of why it isn't getting done. Because we always ascribe it, this is not being done, that's not being done, but we don't arrive at analysis of why it's not being done, and therefore what you need to do about it. So you are quite right. Let's think back to 2018 and the total shutdown marches, and in 2019, the Emergency Response Action Plan following Uyinene Mkhotyana's murder, and then 2020, the NSP. So we have all these things in place. Why have they not been implemented? And here's where I think we need to think quite long and hard about how the problem of gender violence is both specific, but is also related to much deeper general problems in South Africa. And you can't fix gender violence without paying attention to those broader general problems. So I think that's where we're not paying enough attention. Like budgeting. We're going through a state of austerity right now in South Africa. Budgets are being cut left, right, and center. So the questions to ask are, broadly speaking, are we spending our money on the right things? What are the priorities? What can we cut? What shouldn't we cut? How do we measure how well government does use its budget. And I mean, I think we can have a very long discussion about that. Do they budget appropriately? Now, those are much more technical and perhaps more boring conversations to have, but those are the kinds of discussions you need to have if you want to start talking about giving adequate resources to the courts, to domestic violence shelters, to specialised rape courts, to making the police more effective.
Is there a reasonably simple answer as to why these things, which people who've been involved in the field for a very long time believe to be important and necessary and urgent things to be done, why they're not being done? Is there a consensus view amongst the sort of research community who are involved in this? Somebody like you, who I've been talking to you about this work for the 20, 25, 30 years that you've been involved in this work. So, I mean, do you and your colleagues have a clear understanding of why this stuff is not being done?
You know, I think it depends on what your particular research interests are. So, for example, I have a very strong focus on institutions in the state. So for me, a very clear problem is the declining quality of state capacity and the erosion and degradation of our institutions. Let's look at the Madlanga Commission. That is so symptomatic of the problems in the police. The idea that you can magically make the police do a better job in relation to rape and domestic violence in the context of such dysfunction, it's just not going to happen. So, you know, that's where I think the disconnect has been, is linking this to the broader systems of state failure in some instances and dysfunction. Frankly, from my perspective, government over the last decade, 15 years, capabilities have decreased. It's doing worse in some respects in relation to dealing with gender-based violence than it was all those years ago, because it has become so much weaker. So for me, many of the most important interventions are related to how do you make the state much more functional than it currently is.
Which ain't going to happen overnight, but
no, not at all.
Can we start seeing movement in the right direction? Lisa Vetten, thank you very much indeed, a researcher specialising in gender violence. Yeah, I had a thought about women and members of the LGBTQI community refraining from all paid and unpaid work and not spending any money for the day. Not spending any money for the day, you know, what you would have spent money on Friday, you're going to spend money on Saturday and Sunday, because you're going to need to spend that money. You're going to need to buy that thing or those things. And I wondered if this might not have been an approach, is to ask people who say they care about GBV to take all of, if they can afford it, or a percentage of the money that they earn for working on Friday. So take 1/20th of your post-tax salary, your take-home salary, take 1/20th of that and give it to an organization that is helping women who are subjected to the scourge. How many people would do that? Enough to make a meaningful difference to 1 or 2 or 3 shelters? I don't know.